Last time we spoke about the Sino-Soviet conflict of 1929. In 1919, Soviet Commissar Lev Karakan promised China the return of the Chinese Eastern Railway at no cost, aiming to foster good relations amid the Russian Civil War. However, the Soviets retracted the offer, causing tension. Over the next decade, control over the railway shifted between the Chinese and Soviet hands, sparking conflicts. By 1929, Zhang Shuliang, a Chinese warlord, attempted to reclaim the railway, leading to a military confrontation. Despite initial diplomatic efforts, the situation escalated into a full-scale war. The Soviets under General Vasily Blucher launched a powerful offensive, using their superior military force to overpower the Chinese defenders. After intense battles, including naval engagements, the Soviets gained the upper hand, leading to heavy Chinese casualties and a loss of territory. The conflict ended with the Soviets firmly in control, highlighting the fragile nature of the Sino-Soviet relations during this very tumultuous period. This episode is the Chiang-Gui War. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, over at YouTube and all major podcast platforms. For podcasts, I just released a new episode, which was an interview of Lieutenant Colonel Tom Williams, a Vietnam vet. As for YouTube, I just released a new episode with my new animator's work. It is The Battle of Re from 1933. Also, if you have a chance, I have a brand new YouTube membership, and I have, of course, my Patreon account, where you can find the exclusive podcast, you can find early access to all of my content, and voting rights for the subjects I'll tackle next. This month's exclusive podcast over there is going to be on France's role during the Pacific War. With the reunification of China, China's warlord era was over, but not really. Chang Kai-shek came to Beijing via a trail laid open by Shian. The northern expedition had been completed by August, just as the Generalissimo promised it would. According to previous agreements amongst the KMT, he tendered in his resignation upon completing the northern expedition. But the party refused to accept it. Instead, the Generalissimo was commanded to go visit the tomb of Dr. Sun Yat-sen over in the Western Hills. He was accompanied by many of his generals, who oversaw a very impressive ceremony, culminating with Chang Kai-shek weeping before Dr. Sun Yat-sen's shrine. Now, Beijing was of course a symbol of China's Manchu past. The KMT and the revolutionaries within China all hated it for that reason. It was seen as being suitable enough for the government of North China, but not for the national capital. No, that was to be moved to Nanjing. Nanjing, of course, had been the secondary capital for centuries, and it held ancient history, as being the first capital of China. Yet there was a lot of opposition to this. The northern Chinese, of course, wanted to retain Beijing as the capital. Many Chinese scholars had argued against it. The foreign legations were quite annoyed at the idea of moving their residences and staff, and so forth. There was a great love for the northern capital as well, for its wonderful shops, restaurants, rich history, and such. Many did not believe Nanjing could match Beijing's beauty. But the KMT assured all Nanjing would become the new gem of China. Beijing, which was actually called Peking at the time, again, I just keep using modern terms to not confuse all of you guys, but Peking was changed to Beiping, translated to Northern Peace. To be honest, it's not even Nanjing at this time, it's Nanking. But again, I just don't want to confuse everybody. As much as the capital was ruffling feathers, another more pressing issue was the enormous NRA army, now that they had no northern expedition to run. Armies are not cheap, demobilization obviously needed to be done. However, the KMT dragged their feet on the issue. Demobilization is something many governments face, but China's situation was rather unique. The NRA held many professional armies, made up of men who had never been anything but soldiers with no desire to become civilians. Many of the NRA generals also did not wish to carry on as civilians. Most of these men were doing a career and knew nothing else. In June of 1928, over 2 million men were on military payroll. The Minister of Finance, T.V. Soong, believed in keeping straight books and protested the enormous military expenditure. The KMT Central Committee passed resolutions and formed a plan. The standing army needed to be cut down to at least 715,000 men. But when it came to deciding who gets disbanded, well, that's where the troubles lay. There was another issue, the mechanics of the new government. In the first days of peace, Chiang Kai-shek had proven himself a pretty good manager. He had a lot of help from his political right-hand man, Hu Hanmin, and they were on good terms. Chiang Kai-shek was quite popular in the beginning. Many looked up to him. However, as the days went by, things started to crumble. The first major conflict occurred when Chiang Kai-shek attempted to do away with the political sub-councils in Guangzhou and Wuhan. Chiang Kai-shek argued this new united China did not need any more than a single central federal government office. The regimes in Guangzhou and Wuhan needed to disband and become integrated properly at Nanjing. However, Bei Chongxi and Li Zhongren were the respective governors of those two provinces that held these regimes, and they were very much liking their current status. And let us not forget, these two men are both the largest figureheads of the new Guangxi clique. The warlord era is not over. They obviously resented what they saw as a slight against them by Chiang Kai-shek. Both men began using the term dictator to describe Chiang Kai-shek. They said things like he was getting too big for his boots and such. Now going back to the roots of the KMT, Dr. Sun Yat-sen had hoped to implement a national constitution. Yet simply flinging out what Dr. Sun Yat-sen had once written down was out of the question. A new constitution needed to be drafted. Thus basically for the next 5 years, China went through a very awkward transformation process, trying to become a real voting republic. But in the meantime, the country was controlled by a government of 5 yuans. In other words, committees. These were the executive, legislative, control, judicial, and examination committees. The high officials of these committees were members of the State Council, also seen as a cabinet, headed by the president. Chiang Kai-shek became the first president, and he was very careful on who he included in his cabinet. Yan Xishan became the Minister of the Interior, and Fang Yusung the Minister of War. Both of these men were still bona fide warlords, but they were the two leaders who helped reunify China with him. He had to keep them happy. They controlled vast private armies, and he knew he had to keep them close. Nanjing was fraught with activity, but no demobilization. Months went by. Chiang Kai-shek was happy. It was quite a creative time for him. But the reality was, the government was filled with potential traitors. Great amounts of land were not really assimilated, nor were their populations by any means. Nonetheless, China had not seen such unity in centuries. Chiang Kai-shek felt an immense sense of pride. He himself was full of energy and overworking. Chiang Kai-shek began promising to rebuild Nanjing in a fitting style. A magnificent tomb was planned for the slope of the Purple Mountain, among the ruins of the old Ming Temple, where Dr. Sun Yat-sen's remains would be moved. The city was remodeled. Its old narrow and messy streets were cleared out. Nanjing possessed a certain antiquity look, and many were fond of it. They hated the construction efforts. Well, it's like the old saying, no one likes change. Chiang Kai-shek envisioned retaining the Chinese style of architecture, with sloping roofs, painted ceilings, tiles, and courtyards, but also clean, cool interiors with electrical appliances. He basically wanted to blend the new with the old. Chiang Kai-shek found an American architect to help rebuild Nanjing. He also began hunting down advisors for just about every single field. He looked up foreign farmer experts, German military advisors, American educational advisors, medical advisors, highway construction advisors, and such. The climax of it all was a recognition of the new Nanjing government from the great powers. Chiang Kai-shek found himself stuck in interviews with diplomats nearly every single day. It is said the generalissimo worked from dawn to night, with his wife Mei Ling as a secretary. Her primary role was translating important work into English. She was also his English interpreter. Mei Ling pushed Chiang Kai-shek to try and learn English, so he would be less dependent on her. She taught him as best as she could, and he was apparently making good headway until he had a bit of an incident. One day he was meeting with the British minister, and he tried to practice his English by saying, "Good morning, Lamson." and instead he said, "Kiss me, Lamson." Henceforth, he never tried talking in English with foreigners again. In May came some excitement with the Sino-Soviet conflict. Zhang Shiliang literally tossed the Soviet ultimatum to Nanjing, quite the unwelcoming gift to Chiang Kai-shek. Ultimately, Zhang Shiliang could do nothing against the Soviet power. It was certainly a blow to China, but perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, Chiang Kai-shek's mind worried more so about the Japanese. The Soviets and Japanese were not all Chiang Kai-shek should have been worrying about. There were plenty of internal enemies. Back in July of 1928, it was estimated the NRA held more than 2.2 million soldiers within 84 corps and 272 divisions. This accounted for an annual expenditure of over 800 million yuan, when the national fiscal revenue was something like 450 million yuan. Chiang Kai-shek advocated for demobilization, hoping to bring it down to at least 1.2 million, with 80 divisions, thus reducing expenditures to 60% of the national budget. By January of 1929, the issue came up again, now based on German military advisors' advice. Chiang Kai-shek wanted to reduce the NRA to 50 divisions and add around 800,000 troops. His first army, belonging to the Central System, would be reorganized into 20 divisions, and the remaining army groups would be divided into 10 divisions. So you can see where this is going. Chiang Kai-shek also proposed establishing a 200,000-man-strong military police force. So if you remember from the end of the Northern Expedition, there were 4 NRA collective armies. The first was led by Chiang Kai-shek, the second by Fang, the third by Yan Qishan, and the fourth by Li Zongren. Each of these men were the biggest warlords in China in their own right, with their cliques behind them. For example, Li Zongren was the leader of the new Guangxi clique, who controlled Guangxi, Hunan, Hubei, and parts of the Shanhai Pass connecting Hubei to Tianjin. The NRA 4th Army had about 16 divisions and 6 independent units, some 200,000 men. When Wang Jingwei went into exile, Li Zongren inherited his Wuhan regime government. Li Zongren also had the support of Li Jishen, who controlled Guangdong province. Now, Chiang Kai-shek certainly had the upper hand. His first NRA army was 500,000 men strong, and he was the president of the nation. Yan Qishan had over 200,000 troops in his third NRA army, and he controlled the Shanxi clique, Shanxi province, northern Hubei, Beijing, and Tianjin. Lastly, there was Fang Yusang, who had 400,000 troops of his second NRA army. He was the leader of the Kuomingdjun, controlling a large part of northwest China alongside Hunan. Alone, none of the others could really challenge Chiang Kai-shek, but what if they united against him? The new Guangxi clique, led by Bei Chongxi and Li Zongren, had won a lot from the Northern Expedition. They controlled Wang Jingwei's old Wuhan regime, Guangxi, Hubei, but did not control all of Hunan. They both felt they should control all of Hunan, and its lucrative revenues, of course. Yet the governor of Hunan insisted the taxes collected were the property of Nanjing, so Bei Chongxi and Li Zongren replaced him and put him under house arrest. Afterwards, Liu Duping was appointed by Li Zongren to preside over Hunan's civil government. Liu Duping was forced to work with a bitter rival, Hu Jian. What the Guangxi clique members did not know was that Liu Duping was actually a man groomed by Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek also began arming Liu Duping's private army in February of 1928. Hu Jian found out about this and he reported it to the rest of the Guangxi clique. Li Zongren took notice of the situation and he immediately had Liu Duping removed from office and deported. He was replaced by Hu Jian. Go figure. Liu Duping fled to Chiang Kai-shek to go cry. Chiang Kai-shek was furious his man was taken out of office, and he began threatening the Guangxi clique. Li Zongren's family were living in Nanjing at the time, so he took them quickly over to Shanghai, into the concessions over there, because he believed a storm was brewing. Li Zongren then met with Chiang Kai-shek, striking a peaceful deal by March the 2nd, both agreeing Hu Jian would temporarily serve as chairman over Hunan. However, back over in Hunan, the situation was quickly deteriorating. Guangxi troops were taking out political opponents in the province, and they were looking to be fomenting a rebellion. Chiang Kai-shek took decisive action and he mobilized his forces to pacify the Guangxi clique. Li Jishen, fearing a war would break out at any moment, sped north to Nanjing to mediate, only to be arrested upon arriving by Chiang Kai-shek. He was then charged with treason. With Li Jishen out of Guangdong, the Cantonese generals, Chen Shizhen and Chen Mongshu, tossed their lot in with Chiang Kai-shek, thus severing the Guangdong-Guangxi alliance. On March 21st, Nanjing issued a statement expelling Li Zongren, Bei Jiangxi, and Li Qishen from the KMT, accusing the three men of treason. Now, Chiang Kai-shek actually was dealing with a lot more than insubordination from the Guangxi clique. In fact, there was a growing anti-Chiang Kai-shek coalition forming. I won't get into it too much here, but Fang Yusung was raising a lot of hell in the northwest. Yan Xishan was not at all happy either with the new Nanjing government, and even Wang Jingwei over in Europe was tossing public accusations against Chiang Kai-shek. This led a lot of the KMT officials to resign in protest. Chiang Kai-shek had a serious rebellion on his hands. Perhaps a civil war was even on the horizon. He reacted first by bribing key northern Chinese leaders to be neutral for the time being, so he could focus all of his attention against the Guangxi clique menace. Chiang Kai-shek did another clever thing. He reconciled with the exiled Tang Shengji. Many forces under Bei Jiangxi were former soldiers under Tang Shengji. Many of them were still loyal to him. Chiang Kai-shek brought Tang Shengji back over to China from Japan, and he dispatched him to Tangshan in Hubei, where he would be ordered to steal back 2 of his old divisions from Bei Jiangxi. Yes, Chiang Kai-shek was playing the divide-and-conquer strategy. First, he bribed as many as he could, so he could focus on the Guangxi clique. Then amongst the Guangxi clique, he tried to bribe some and arrest others, isolating Bei Jiangxi and Li Zongren. In the face of the situation, Zhang Shiliang was the first to publicly express his support for Chiang Kai-shek. He was soon followed by Luai Wanhui, the warlord of Sichuan province. Then Yan Xishan came around, and last was a very reluctant Fang Yusung. Initially, Bei Jiangxi was going to lead his troops stationed at Hubei to march south to Suzhou to try and link up with other Guangxi clique forces to advance east and attack Nanjing. However, as he quickly found out, most of his troops were loyal to Tang Shengji, who purchased their service and stole them right from him. Bei Jiangxi lost control over a significant part of his army. He panicked and he fled to Hubei by boat. He intended to flee for Hong Kong, but Chiang Kai-shek ordered the Navy to halt the ship, and if the ship wouldn't stop, to sink it. Li Zongren quickly asked support from Japanese allies to get Bei Jiangxi safely to Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Li Zongren began mobilizing 3 armies under Guangxi generals Xiao Wei, Tao Wei, and Hu Zongji. These armies were intended to deploy in Hangpu and Wushu. However, Li Zongren and Bei Jiangxi could not physically get over to command them. Meanwhile, Chiang Kai-shek appointed General Zhu Peidu to command 5 divisions in Zhejiang and Nanchang. Their job was to occupy the Wuchang-Changsha Railway, thus cutting off the withdrawal of any troops from Guangxi. Chiang Kai-shek also placed General Liao Zhi in command of 5 divisions over in Anhui in Hubei's border area with orders to attack Wuhan, and General Han Fuzhi would take 5 divisions from southern Henan to attack Wuhan. On March 31st, Chiang Kai-shek dispatched his general attack orders. Subsequently, He Jian betrayed the Guangxi clique and joined Chiang Kai-shek. Within the Guangxi clique, the generals Hu Zongtang, Tao Shi, Li Mingru, and Yu Zoubai all began in-house fighting over old petty grudges. Chiang Kai-shek learned of the situation, and he bribed Yu Zoubai and Li Mingru to join his side for over 400,000 silver dollars. That's a lot of money back then. On April the 3rd, Li Mingru's troops began to defect over in Haiyuan and Zhaozhan. A bunch of other Guangxi generals began contacting Chiang Kai-shek privately to tell him they would not participate in the civil war and asked if they could take their men safely out of the region. So many gaps in the Guangxi clique's defensive lines around Wuhan were exploited by Nanjing's forces coming from Anhui, Jiangxi, Henan, and Yichang. Nearly surrounded at Wuhan, the Guangxi forces fled into western Hubei, and at that time, Li Zongren and Bei Jiangxi had just arrived in Hong Kong. They were trying to make their way to Guangxi, only to find the situation was in utter chaos. On April the 11th, Nanjing issued a message calling upon the Guangxi clique's troops to give up the resistance. The demoralized Guangxi troops of Xiao Wei, Tao Jun, Hu Zongtang all began surrendering themselves at Shaoxi, Yichang, and other places. On April the 25th, Chiang Kai-shek unleashed an offensive into Guangxi province. The response by the surviving Guangxi clique members was to establish an anti-Chiang Kai-shek coalition on May the 5th. They dispatched a telegram calling upon everyone to join them, and initiated an offensive first aimed at Guangdong. By the 15th, Fang Yusung heeded the call and began discussing how the Guoming might send troops to attack Chiang Kai-shek. However, Fang Yusung's colleagues, such as Han Fuyu and Shi Yusan, urged Fang Yusung not to do so. Then Chiang Kai-shek offered Fang Yusung the position as president of the executive committee, control over Hubei and Hunan, if he continued to support him and send forces against the Guangxi rebels. Fang Yusung superficially agreed to Chiang Kai-shek's request, mobilizing his forces between Hunan and Hubei. While this looked like he was helping Chiang Kai-shek, in reality he was eagerly awaiting in the shadows for Chiang Kai-shek and the Guangxi clique's forces to weaken so he might pounce upon Wuhan. By mid-May, Guangxi's troops began entering Guangdong from two directions, easily overwhelming the Guangdong Provincial Army, and then they marched into Guangzhou. Chiang Kai-shek mobilized further armies in Henan, Yunnan, and Guizhou to invade Guangxi. This soon saw a major battle break out in the Baimu region, ultimately dislodging the Guangxi troops from Guangdong and then back into Guangxi. However, simultaneously, the Guangxi forces advanced to the front lines in Guilin and Luizhou, defeating forces at Shangjun, Qijun, and the forces in the areas around them. In that same month in Henan, a significant push was made from Shonan to Guilin. Meanwhile, Guangdong's forces attacked Zhaoqing from Wuzhou, He County, and Guizhou's Dushan County, ultimately seizing Luizhou. Chiang Kai-shek quickly mobilized forces led by Li Mingru and Yu Zhaobai, and the old army under Yang Tonghui to move south towards Guangdong and to the west to attack Guangxi. Thanks to the strong efforts of these forces, they swiftly captured Wuzhou and Guiping. Wei Yunwei abandoned the city, and the Guangxi forces were unable to sustain the fight. Guangxi province was then attacked from three fronts, with enemy forces advancing from Longzhou. By June, Li Zongren, Bei Chongxi, and Huang Xiaozhong had all fallen. Li Zongren, Bei Chongxi, and the others had fled to Hong Kong, Saikung, Haiphong, and other localities. On June the 27th, Li Mingru and his troops entered Nanning. The new Guangxi clique was defeated, and Chiang Kai-shek appointed Li Mingru, Yu Zhaobang, and Yang Tonghui to govern Guangxi province. The war concluded with Chiang Kai-shek's victory. What became known as the Chang-Gui War had lasted for about 3 months, and it ended in a complete victory for the KMT. It was a severe blow to the Guangxi clique, though actually not a fatal one. The Guangxi clique leaders had lost considerable power, but those like Li Zongren and Bei Chongxi would return to cause further trouble. Victory would be short-lived, however, as Fang Yusung arrayed his forces between Hunan and Hubei, hoping to pounce upon Wuhan at the right moment. Chiang Kai-shek defeated the Guangxi clique far too quickly. Fang Yusung's opportunity was lost, and he became extremely bitter over this. Knowing full well what Fang Yusung had been planning to do all along, Chiang Kai-shek mobilized forces in Shandong and Hunan to suppress the Guoming. Fang Yusung then declared himself commander-in-chief of the Northwest National Salvation Army, officially joining the anti-Chiang Kai-shek cause. Chiang Kai-shek then bribed generals Han Fuju and Shi Yusan to defect over to his side, greatly hurting Fang Yusung. Chiang Kai-shek also unleashed propaganda warfare, accusing Fang Yusung of sabotaging the revolution, being treasonous, trying to obstruct the unification of China, and so forth. On May the 23rd, the KMT Central Committee removed Fang Yusung from all of his posts and permanently expelled him from the party. 2 days later, Chiang Kai-shek personally called Fang Yusung, asking him to go into exile abroad and to hand over his remaining forces. Completely isolated politically and militarily, Fang Yusung sent a nationwide telegram on the 27th expressing his resignation. In order to mitigate Chiang Kai-shek's advances, and in order to see if he could gain an alliance, Fang Yusung took his family to Shanxi on June the 21st, claiming to the nation he was about to go abroad. Instead, he went to Yan Xishan's place under house arrest within the Jinxi Temple at Jianan village. Fang Yusung and Yan Xishan were not friends by any measure, but they were quick to reach an understanding. The two warlords made a formidable combination, and they had similar attributes. Both were strong men. They were firmly loyal and affectionate forces. Fang Yusung had his theatrical Christian values and his rustic simplicity. Yan Xishan had his record of being a very just man and a man of the people. Both understood their names combined would see many join their cause. They named their coalition the People's Army. Yan Xishan then joined Fang Yusung to publicly label Chiang Kai-shek a dictator. Despite the energy and the charisma, what the two men lacked was a brilliant political mind, and then suddenly one Wang Jingwei came out of the woodwork. Wang Jingwei joined their coalition, obviously hoping to get revenge and dethrone Chiang Kai-shek. He supplied them with loftier motives and a more stylish vocabulary. Together, they publicly accused Chiang Kai-shek of departing from the original spirit of the revolution, that he was the scourge of democracy, nothing more than a military man who sought to seize the power of government. Bei Zhongxi and Li Zongren bandwagoned, and it seemed a large part of China was becoming very anti-Chiang Kai-shek. After this, a telegram war erupted for over a month. Yan Xishan demanded the current KMT government step down so that he and Wang Jingwei could lead a reorganization, implementing proper votes by all the party members to determine the party's policies going forward in a more fair manner. Chiang Kai-shek responded he was willing to step aside for Yan Xishan, but not for Wang Jingwei. Then Chiang Kai-shek bribed Yan Xishan with $12.5 million of foreign currency if he would back down. To make matters more complicated, during all of this, Fang Yusung sent a secret message with his subordinate, Liu Zhonglin, to forces in Shaanxi, asking them to send people to contact Chiang Kai-shek. He did this deliberately, making sure Yan Xishan found the note, and of course suspected him of being in league with Chiang Kai-shek. Some real Game of Thrones shit was going on. It seems Fang Yusung pulled a big brain move because Yan Xishan, under the belief Fang Yusung was colluding with Chiang Kai-shek, then publicly claimed he was the commander-in-chief of the anti-Chiang Kai-shek coalition, and that his deputy commanders were Fang Yusung, Li Zongren, and Zhang Shuliang. So in essence, it seems Fang Yusung had dragged Yan Xishan into the fold and binded him to the cause because perhaps he knew Chiang Kai-shek was trying to bribe and divide them all. On February the 23rd, under the leadership of Yan Xishan, 45 generals including Fang Yusung, Li Zongren, Zhang Fukuai, Hu Jian, Han Fuzhu, She Yushan, and Yang Huchang jointly sent a telegram demanding, quote, "A general vote of all party members be established to unify the party." On February the 27th of 1930, Yan Xishan personally visited Fang Yusung in Jianan village, where they apparently hugged each other and cried, stating to each other, "We live and die together, share hardships, and fight against Chiang Kai-shek until the end." Then they pledged their blood to form an alliance. It was very theatrical. The next morning, Yan Xishan hosted a banquet for Fang Yusung's family, where 34 representatives joined the anti-Chiang Kai-shek coalition. This all became known as the Taiyuan Conference. On March the 1st, the coalition sent officials into 19 provinces and cities including Beiping, Nanjing, Guangzhou, and even overseas to attack Chiang Kai-shek. They stated, "If Chiang Kai-shek refuses to give up, the revolutionary forces will be increasingly destroyed by him. I sincerely hope that our compatriots and comrades throughout the country will rise up together and eliminate the thieves together." That same month, the Nanjing government held their third plenary session, where they expelled Wang Jingwei officially from the party. Yan Xishan then called Chiang Kai-shek, asking him personally to step down. On March the 15th, 57 generals from the former 2nd, 3rd, and 4th NRA armies sent representatives to Taiyuan to discuss the anti-Chiang movement. There they listed 6 crimes Chiang Kai-shek had committed and promoted Yan Xishan to be the official commander-in-chief of the Army, Navy, and Air Forces of the new Republic of China. Li Zongren, Fang Yusung, and Zhang Shuliang would be his deputy commanders. Yan Xishan's army moved into the government offices in Beiping, where the KMT forces there were disarmed. On April the 1st, Yan Xishan, Fang Yusung, and Li Zongren announced their inauguration in Taiyuan, Dongguan, and Guiping of their anti-Chiang army. However, one name was not present. Or was he? Of course, that was Zhang Shuliang. I would like to take this time to remind all of you this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all of that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube and all major podcast platforms. For podcasts, I'm now opening up into more general history with a new co-host. We're about to release a new episode where we go over the 10 best generals of the Roman Republic. As for YouTube, I just released my first episode with my new animator covering the battle for Rehe. In order to pay that animator, I have opened up a YouTube membership, and of course I have my Patreon account that can be found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Both have the same perks and prices, and by joining either, at minimum you get access to the exclusive podcast, early access to all of my content, and voting rights for what I will tackle next. The latest exclusive podcast is on France's role during the Pacific War. After performing the Northern Expedition and finally reunifying China, it took all but, just over a year for it to collapse? It really seems that most of China banded together against the Generalissimo, but he was no fool, and he had planned accordingly. The anti-Chang Kai-shek coalition would find themselves in a war they might very well lose.